Welcome to a special episode of the Voice of San Diego podcast. We are joined in the great Voice of San Diego podcast studio by County Supervisor Kristin Gaspar, who we learned yesterday has decided to defend her title to run for re-election as the County Supervisor. Kristin Gaspar, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me on.
So, okay, we got the news yesterday. You announced it, and here is my first question, which is, walk me through your decision a little bit. It has not been a secret that you have been flirting with the idea of potentially running for Congress. You've spent a fair amount of time in Washington, D.C., more than most local officials do during the last couple years. So what did it ultimately come down to? You've also, in the last couple of weeks even, been taken on a very high-profile role in some very local issues. So what was it that made you decide what you wanted to do in 2020 now?
Well, thanks for asking. First and foremost, make no mistake, I've always said, first and foremost, I love my job. When I ran for Congress in the last election cycle, it was one of the toughest decisions that I ever could have made because I love my job. I love my community. I grew up here. My roots are here. My family's business is here. My family's here. But it was really challenging the early days on the Board of Supervisors, recognizing that we're a pass-through agency for state and federal programs and their dollars. And some of the decision-making out of Sacramento and D.C. can't be classified as good decision-making, and it has a real local impact. So when the opportunity to run for Congress came up, I felt quite strongly that we needed solid representation that loves San Diego in Washington, D.C. to help better guide those programs and those dollars to benefit the San Diego community. All of those things remain true today. However, what's really important to me was going back out to the community. And this is where I've invested not only my life, but also my political career and what I've built on the board. I've had the unique opportunity as a county supervisor to work with some of the most challenging populations here, the homeless population, the addicted, the repeat incarcerated population in our community. In doing so, I've brought some real innovation to the table. And in talking to people out in the community, they felt quite strongly I needed to carry forward that work. And I felt as though we've laid some good framework, but now it's time to finish that job. And that's what I'll be doing over the next few years and in support of my reelection.
Yeah, I think the county has certainly, as a local reporter following different local governments, the county has certainly been a pass-through agency in recent years. The last 5 months have interestingly shown that the government does have an ability to be a little bit more proactive and more hands-on if it chooses to, and it simply hadn't chosen to before. I wonder, when you felt like you had to consider a run for Congress to be a little bit more out in front of these things, why didn't it occur to you at the time that maybe the county didn't have to behave the way it had always behaved?
I've served in other local office. I served on a city council. I served as mayor. And there was always such a separation between the work we were doing, even on city council, from the school board. And there wasn't a lot of collaboration between agencies. And when I first started my work on the Board of Supervisors, it did frustrate me frequently, the policies that were coming out of Sacramento and D.C. And I've decided that at the end of the day, we can carry advocacy in a lot of different forms. We absolutely need to engage more with our state and our federal government, and we are doing that on the board. And that's why I've been under criticism for sitting at the table with the President of the United States. I want to make something clear. I know he's not popular in San Diego. I know this is the case. But whether or not I believe someone's popular, that's not my job. My job is to do what's best for San Diego, to produce results for San Diego. I can say, in watching Speaker Pelosi just last week, meeting with the president on infrastructure, that to me represents the finest in governing. Being able to sit down at a table, not the back and forth bickering between parties, but just to sit down and to come out of that meeting and say, hey, that was productive by all means. We felt good about that meeting. Like Speaker Pelosi, it's very important that I represent everyone while I'm there. And if I agree with the president that he can be helpful to San Diego on something, then he can be helpful, and I'm supportive of that. But at times where I think he's doing something that's harmful to San Diego, I'm going to stand up and say it too, like I did with the offshore drilling and opposing the administration. So I think we have a real opportunity to do more in terms of advocacy, not working in silos, but working between agencies, whether it's other regional agencies or other municipalities, our local school boards, our hospitals, our nonprofit organizations in San Diego. We have to reach out more and not work within our own walls.
So you have reached out to President Trump. You've traveled to D.C. to discuss border issues. And I think one of the reasons people were watching so closely your decision about your next move in office is because you've started to weigh in so vocally on some of these national issues. So I wanted to talk about some of those. You kind of led the county's effort to step into the fight over SB 54 about a year ago. And in the time since you guys weighed in on whether to file an amicus brief, 2 courts have decided that the law is constitutional. And you had said that it's not and that it's dangerous for San Diego. Do you still believe that the law is unconstitutional and dangerous?
Public safety is my top priority. Every elected official will tell you that. I will stand here with conviction and tell you public safety is my interest in sitting at the table. Every time I've been to DC, every time I've been at the table with the president, it's in the interest of a safer community here in San Diego. We're talking about issues that our community, quite frankly, has chosen to just brush under the rug for a long time. Human trafficking. The last time I sat at the table with the president, the conversation was around San Diego being number 2 in the country for human trafficking. The fact that we have 12,000 human trafficking victims and survivors in San Diego alone. It's mind-boggling to think about that. To think about the average age of these girls that are being trafficked being 16 years old. Tough conversation to have with our community. Like SB 54, another tough conversation to have with our community because people easily just say that it's anti-immigration that you're after. I'm after cooperation between agencies. And when I see that the hands are tied of our local law enforcement, when they cannot communicate, when people who have created criminal acts in our community are going to be released back out, and I hear from our community, they say, look, we don't want arrests happening in our community. It's terrifying when we have Border Patrol coming into the communities. But if arrests can't be made at the jail, and the arrests have to only be made out in the community, I don't think that helps us police better. I don't think people are going to report crimes in that scenario. So make no mistake, every time I've been at that table, if people watched the clips, if they watched the advocacy, I was there to talk about public safety. The Mason family, who I've been very close with lately, it's heartbreaking to see what's happened to their son, who was murdered outside of LA Fitness in San Diego in February. He was murdered by a twice deported illegal immigrant. Now, this family, their future's forever altered. They lost their son, and they cannot get the government in Mexico to sign his extradition orders. It's been on the desk in Mexico for an entire year in June. This is the type of advocacy that we need at the national level because San Diego is the 5th largest county in this nation. We need strong advocacy at every level.
But aside from the individual high-profile cases like the one you just mentioned, San Diego is one of the biggest, safest big cities in the country. And so do you think that...
But to say you're the safest doesn't mean it's absent any issues. We constantly have to strive for improvements. Human trafficking is real. What the other issue that we have is drug trafficking across our border.
I'm really glad you brought both of those up because the experts that we've talked to, including District Attorney Summer Steffen, who's a national expert on trafficking, has said that the lion's share of human trafficking that occurs here is domestic. The victims are American and the perpetrators are American. So I'm
not
curious
all a
as
border
to why.
issue,
right? But you brought it up in context of the border, and you also brought up drugs, and that we know that drug smuggling happens through ports of entry. So I'm just curious as to why those things get brought up in a discussion of immigration enforcement.
Do I think it's all of the problem? Absolutely not. But we can't ignore that we have issues. We are a border community, and we can do better. Think about it. 100 South Bay teens, 100 kids, students in our schools that have been recruited over gaming headsets and social media to carry dangerous drugs like fentanyl across our border. 100 high school students were caught last year. Can you imagine the number of students that were not caught? That is absolutely a border issue that's happening, the close proximity to the border. Synthetic fentanyl is being produced in Mexico. It's being laced into cocaine, it's being laced into opioids, and it's being brought back across this border. You need to ask our law enforcement agencies about this happening, because the opioid crisis in San Diego County is real. And that's why I've worked extensively in areas to try to come up with community-driven solutions so that we can increase awareness. We have our coalition between the San Diego Association of Realtors. We've created the Keep Kids Safe program to increase advocacy in our community, to talk about awareness around these issues, about making every day a prescription drug take-back day. I'm not blaming the border for all the issues that we have here, but we also can't ignore the issues that we have. Saved in America is a great organization too. It will help you be more in touch with the work that I believe some very angelic people in San Diego are doing each and every day. These are former Navy SEALs turned private investigators. They're helping patrol the perimeter of some of our foster youth facilities in San Diego. I bring this to your attention because state law says that we cannot lock our foster youth facilities. Now, what's happening is the pimps have become quite aware of these policies, and they're reaching out to these girls over social media. They're turning up to our foster youth facilities, and I take this very seriously because these kids are the county's kids. They're my kids in those facilities. They're under my watch. They take those girls out Friday. They pimp them out over the weekend. They return them Sunday night to be taken care of at our own foster youth facilities throughout the week. Saved in America is a fabulous group, and they stage outside of our foster youth facilities and throughout San Diego to recover girls from human trafficking, but to protect them and be proactive. So there are a lot of things that are happening in our community that are tough conversations, but I also want to point to a lot of good that's happening too.
So I want to push a little bit on the relationship between these things and immigration enforcement. I mean, on SB 54 specifically, Sheriff Bill Gore said that he thinks that he didn't seem very alarmed by it, and he said that this was something we could work with, the way that the bill was ended up being written.
Well, you have to think of the advocacy and the position that he's in. It's a tough position. The original bill that was written was much worse, and I've been the first to admit that it was a lot worse. Governor Brown, because he had productive conversations with our sheriff's departments, not only in San Diego, but across the state, it did get better. Is it good? Is it ideal? No, I think if you ask some real pointed questions about whether or not the sheriff would prefer to have SB 54 or not, he'd have to answer that. It's gotten better over time. There was the 800 list that some people refer to, the 800 offenses under which you can actually report between U.S. Customs and Border Protection and our local law enforcement. But there's some troubling nature about SB 54 too, where repeat offenses aren't considered. So someone that's out that has, for example, repeat DUIs, who's obviously potentially creating harm out in the community, that under SB 54 will be protected. From the onset, I just want to say, we talked a little bit about the court cases. It never was my expectation that we would win in any of the lower courts. I felt for sure that this was an issue that was going to go all the way to the Supreme Court. I feel that way today. And I'm limited on what I can say because obviously we're part of that.
Sure. But I mean, even predating SB 54, San Diego was a city that would routinely come up in these unofficial sanctuary city lists because of SDPD policy. And those SDPD policies, I mean, I guess we could say somebody could argue that they were politically driven or something, but they seemed to be coming from SDPD leadership under the idea that you wanted to have a free flow of information and ideas from communities to law enforcement, and that anything that would get in the way of that because of immigration enforcement may actually make communities less safe, not more safe. That's been the position. That was the position of SDPD under Shelley Zimmerman. It's the position of SDPD now under Chief Neislat. So I mean, if it's is it an immigration issue, or is it a safety issue? Because it seems like law enforcement is actually less concerned with these issues than some of the political people are.
You need to ask law enforcement about whether an arrest should be made out in the community or in the jail itself. Because what used to happen is that if someone was detained in our local jails prior to their release, that information was communicated to U.S. Protection and Border Patrol. Now, did they always go in and intervene at that point? No. The answer is no. That if they didn't intervene in a certain time frame, that individual was released back out in the community. But the opportunity to intervene was present. That shifted under SB 54 if it fell outside of the list of offenses that were reportable. The major issue that I have, and I do believe law enforcement shares as well, is these arrests are now made out in the community. I think there's universal agreement that these arrests should not happen out in the community, that we actually need immigrants in our community to report crimes. We share that. I haven't met someone yet that does not believe we should not create an environment where people appreciate the presence of our local law enforcement and feel safe in reporting things. I absolutely advocate for that safety as well. I think that these arrests are better made in jail. That's one of the reasons why I can't support a policy that makes these arrests happen in our local neighborhoods, because now you're impacting families that didn't create that crime. They weren't causing any harm out in our community. Also, I want to point out how important our border is, because we can talk about challenges that we have as a border community, but the importance of that cross-border commerce for not only San Diego, but for the entire state. I mean, we rely on that binational commerce. And when people in DC aren't doing their jobs, they're not casting tough votes that we need, and we're having to do things like shut down the border. Unfortunately, that's a tragic loss for our community financially, too, because we cannot move goods and services across that border. So it's very important that we maintain a strong relationship with Mexico and allow for that binational economy to really flourish. That's something that I strongly stand in support of.
Given that the importance of that relationship, do you support the president's plan to build a wall?
Look, we have a wall in San Diego. We've had one for a long time. The wall isn't going to solve all the problems for San Diego. All we've talked about in terms of infrastructure in San Diego, it's really reinforcing areas that may not be existing today or in disrepair, for example. But I've talked to the agency itself, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and said, hey, is a wall going to solve all of our problems? Well, San Diego is a perfect test case for no, it's not. Continual investments in technology are going to be very helpful. I was pleased to see coming out of the administration an acknowledgement that we needed to make greater investments in technology. Also talking with the special agents that work on the border protection side that you don't hear a lot about. They said, actually, to do our jobs better, we need additional dollars to pay informants. Because our job is not just to stop drugs at the border. Our job is to go in and take out the drug cartel. And we can't do that without these resources. So we have a wall in San Diego. It's not even a discussion point into the future in terms of how do we best manage as a border community. We need to make investments in technology. We need to make investments in perhaps informants, other creative ways. But I think in order to come up with these solutions, we have to talk to the boots on the ground, the people that are trying their best to do their job each and every day to keep all of our communities safe, keep a functional border so that we can have that strong binational relationship in place.
I mean, when President Trump has come to visit the San Diego border, he didn't tour investments in technology, and he didn't tour money for informants, and he didn't tour the existing fence. He toured prototypes of a new structure that would be built in San Diego and elsewhere that, he has called a wall. And
well, maybe
so
I'm not on the same page.
I'm asking if you support that new structure that he has come specifically to tout that it's being built.
So here's how I understand it, and I could be wrong. You'd have to ask the president on this one. But the prototypes were being built here in San Diego. We already have a wall, so it was a place to come and demonstrate that a wall does exist in a community. But it was never my impression that our infrastructure was being torn down and replaced with the new prototypes that were there at all. But again, that's a question for the administration, and not really one that I can answer. And I don't know what's in his head. You know, so much of what elected officials do are photo ops. They're opportunities just to get out. And I'm sure he has put in plenty of time looking on the technology side too, because they've agreed to the financial commitment of that. San Diego actually was a pilot city for new drone technology. I'm not sure if that was a consideration, but again, I can't speak for the administration. I can speak for the work I'm doing on the county board though.
So let's talk about some local stuff. You are on you're on the Sandag board now. That new this year, right?
Yes, I'm a newbie.
Yeah. And so Sandag is suddenly the hot place where a lot of political fights are happening in San Diego. And you have been very much a part of that. Walk me through what it is your perspective that you want out of where things are going right now. Because I'll ask you, I want to ask a little bit more pointed, because the thing that I don't quite understand is that one of the main reasons we're in this position in the first place is that Transnet doesn't have enough money to build everything. The reasons for that I've been writing about for the last 2 years.
I'm sorry.
Yes. But it is the case that the precursor to our present conversation was Transnet doesn't have enough money to build everything. And so while I understand that you and Jim Desmond and now your colleague Diane Jacob have said that there's an obligation for Sandag to make good on its past promises, and to do otherwise would be a bait and switch on these highway projects. It's also the case that there's not enough money to build all the highway projects.
Yeah, we're not advocating for status quo.
Yeah. So
status quo is what I work against every day in my job. I'm advocating for a balanced transportation plan for San Diego. The current plan on the table is a mass transit only plan, scrapping some really important infrastructure projects, especially for North and East counties. So let me explain. Do I think that all 14 highway projects that have been ignored, that were voted on as part of that Transnet tax, specifically spelled out to the voters, should be included in this new plan? I'm realistic. That's not going to happen. But there are projects that we have been promising to our community for a lot longer than the Transnet tax, decades, that have been kicked down the road, specifically the 78. I invite anybody to go drive on the 78 in that morning, evening rush hour, even during the mid hours of the day now. Mm-hmm. The 78, we're talking about HOV lanes. Same thing on the 52, another important project that needs to happen, HOV lanes. Then State Route 67, troubling. It's something that I won't even drive at night. That community has long been promised what is a major public safety upgrade for the community. Lots of people dying in accidents there. And then, of course, as Supervisor Jacob pointed out at the meeting, it was only by the grace of God during the Cedar Fire that our first responders were able to get in and our community was able to get out without being trapped. So do I think that those projects should be kicked down the road again? No, I do not. Let me point to a good example, because sometimes it's helpful for people to visualize what I'm talking about when I say balance. Number one, environmental protection. In Encinitas, a project that I did support was the San Elijo Lagoon Restoration Project. It's happening right next to another project I supported, which was the rail double tracking. It's happening right next to a third project that I supported, which was the widening of the I-5 freeway. They're all happening right next to each other at the same exact time. Right below the bridge, biking trails, walking paths. We're expanding the bikeway so that people can actually move under the freeway. So again, that's the type of creativity and balance that I hope to see in the future. That you can't just say you have a balanced plan by investing in only one thing. So
I thought I don't know if you agree with this, but I thought that the presentation that Hassan and Sandag's staff gave to the board last week about the plan actually lacked some clarity. There was a map with some lines on it about the corridors, but it wasn't actually very specific in terms of what would be happening.
What are
on
the
those
projects?
corridors.
Correct. And
Right.
The biggest thing that was lacking was any sort of indication of a dollar sign.
Yes.
It scares me coming from the private sector. It scares me having grown a business. We create visions all the time, and we're not about sticking with the status quo or what we said we'd do years ago. Those things are flexible. They adapt over time. Yeah. But one thing that's common to any plan that we come up with is some indication over cost, because one thing you can't do in the community, you can't overpromise and underdeliver. Remember, Sandag did that before. That's what led us to this place. Mm-hmm. In 2004, the voters approved of that half-cent sales tax increase. Transnet dollars for the next 40 years will be paying that sales tax increase. We committed to that at the time. Now we're told, actually, there aren't any dollars in Transnet. So even if you wanted to move forward with those 14 highway projects, the dollars aren't there. But now we're going to go back to the very same voters and say, yeah, you gave us your money before, but it's not enough for this big, bold, new vision for the region. And now we need you to invest even more money, because I guarantee it that this same board is going to go after a special tax. Mm-hmm. They'll have no choice but to go after a special tax. So the price tag is left off intentionally, knowing that we can't afford any of what we're doing.
But so would it be fair to say that you'd be able to find your way to supporting something if, let's focus on the 78 corridor, if that corridor, maybe it includes some transit projects, but it should also include something for a highway, whether it's HOV lanes or something else?
A balanced plan. That's all I'd like to see in the future. And also one that, we're realistic about living within our means. Far too long, these regional agencies that other electeds serve on, they come together and they make decisions that are very important ones for our region, but they're not mindful of working within our means and being realistic about it and working in an incremental way. We can have it all. Can we have it all at once? No, we can't. Also, just the design of Sandag is interesting, because you take elected leaders from all over San Diego County and you expect them to come to one table and put the regional hat on, mm-hmm. and not be really advocating for their smaller piece of the pie. It's really challenging to do. It's hard to kind of check the area, the city that you're coming from at the door and walk in and just be neutral and think about San Diego as a region. Mm-hmm. And that's why for the longest time, North County has been neglected, because the meetings, they're downtown. We have a strong downtown voting block, more weighted votes given for cities that are, closer to San Diego City proper. Mm-hmm. And North County, we've just been neglected over time. And I can tell you that the community has woken up and they're not pleased about it. And you're hearing from people who are sitting for hours in their cars and wasting a lot of time in commute.
Well, so the Sandag's under two pressures right now. One is the financial pressure from Transnet, and the other is state mandates.
That's right.
And just a couple months ago, Hassan went to the board and said, it's time to come clean. A plan like the one we have on the books right now, or something that looks very much like it, is just not going to be able to comply with state law, which is why we have to start over, which is why we have to delay this out till 2021. So I wonder... I hear you what you're saying about regional equity and a balanced plan in terms of modes, but there's another reality that needs to be reconciled here, which is, can it meet the GHG reductions that are required?
And we absolutely have to meet our state mandates. We
mm-hmm.
do. Mm-hmm. I appreciated Hassan coming to the board and saying, look, the status quo plan isn't going to cut it. We actually can't get there and meet the state greenhouse gas reductions. I think that's very important, and he was supported by the entire board in coming mm-hmm. back and granting him more time to do so. Now, in the interim, it meant the other plan was completely tossed out. Mm-hmm. And now we have a strategy that's mass transit only. Mm-hmm. Do I think we needed to go that far? No. Now we have about a 30% reduction in GHG, which is well over the state mandates that we need to make. Now, I'm okay with us, exceeding the state's goals sometimes too. I'm not suggesting that we just always do things bare minimum, but I don't think it meant that you had to kick out some of those vital public safety improvements. And when you're talking about installing HOV lanes, on a highway, or getting creative about those lanes. Supervisor Desmond will tell you, hey, wouldn't it be great to have a technology lane and acknowledge and reward people who have invested in that new technology that's coming online. So I think we can get creative without saying, hey, one mode of transportation is entirely out, because 97% of the San Diego community is currently reliant on using their automobile as a form of transportation. In cities like North County, it's hard to achieve a mass transit only solution. I coach Pop Warner sports, for example. I'm a mom. I have 3 kids. By the time it's 8 a.m., I've done 4 carpool drop-offs. 4 before I ever consider my commute to my ultimate destination, which is my workplace in downtown San Diego. So for moms like me, we need to have a variety of options. And currently, with the plan how I see it on the paper, I will hand the director of Sandag my daily schedule. And if he can find a way to navigate that schedule using mass transportation only within the hours that I need to be places, I'll be the first to raise my hand and take that.
You mentioned the GHG reductions and state mandates, overshooting them, coming in at the bare minimum, et cetera. Do you, as far as that being, so that is the state law. That's the law of the land, as Hassan says. Is it a priority you share, lowering GHG reductions, regardless of what the state says we must do? Is that something that you think should be a priority?
I think San Diego is a unique place, and anyone who's lived here for a moment or spent their entire life here knows how important the natural environment is to San Diego. Look outside. I mean, we're reminded daily by the beauty of our ocean that environmental protection should always be top of mind. We always need to be doing our best to protect the environment. So this is something that I believe in strongly, that we do need to reduce greenhouse gases. I think it's really important to watch new technology come online. You know, these are the types of technology that I was the first to get out in front of. When they brought hybrid vehicles out, I thought this is great because we can protect our environment. At the same time, we can save at the pump. So that's a real win-win. So striking that balance between environmental protections and really valuing our beautiful natural environment that we're blessed with here in San Diego is important to me. And I think most San Diegans are in that place. We do have to strike balance too. And we can't degrade quality of life by investing only in options that make our daily lives even harder. I think we can do better. I think we can achieve both.
So this week, Councilman Mark Kersey announced that he was leaving the Republican Party. And I know that, we have people in all the time and we kind of ask about the future of the party. And a lot of them point to you as one of the handful of Republicans who they see as a real bright spot in the county. Can you just talk a little bit about, your vision for the party and why you care about it and what you think its prospects are, even though, we keep seeing the Brian Mainshines and the Mark Kersey is leaving?
It's tough to be a Republican in San Diego. I'll be the first to admit that. It's tough to be a Republican throughout the state of California. And certainly politics is at a place where it's incredibly divisive. And just when you think, gosh, I don't know if I want to even navigate this anymore, I always find that there are these great kind of angels out in the community that will stop you, out grabbing a cup of coffee and just say, hey, thanks. I've been watching what you're doing and I'm really thankful that you're there. And that kind of recharges you and gets you through. So the party structure, we have a lot of work to do. And I haven't always fit the mold. I mean, if you look back historically on when I ran for office, when I ran for this seat as supervisor, I wasn't supported in that primary by my own political party. I was newer on the scene. I was not part of that party establishment. And to this day, I'm not part of that party establishment. You saw in the last election when I ran for Congress, I did not do so with the support of the local party. So I think that there's a disconnect sometimes between those serving in local politics and even their own political parties. So I think that whether someone's a Republican or a Democrat or now Mark Kersey as an independent, the most important thing is we have a lot of work to do learning how to work productively with one another again and being respectful. I just always talk about trying to see beyond the party labels and see people as human beings. And that's what we've lost over time. It's hard to see people as human beings. You get so worked up over policies that you disagree with that you forget to find out a little bit about the core of that human being and what they're all about. So to the extent possible, anyone who comes up and attacks me, my plan has always been to take them to coffee. And if they sit down with me and they still want to come up to the microphone and they want to say all those things, fine. But I gave them the opportunity to see me as a human being and to see that my intentions in serving our community are pure. And if they want to still say those things, then have at it. But it really has helped over time. And I think if our elected sat down more, I think people would be surprised to learn of elected officials that do get along very well in our region. You know, I talked about recently the issue we were having in our foster youth facility. Well, I can complain about it, but I can also sit down with our local leaders that are not of the same political party as me and talk to them about it and see if they can help.
The race out of the last cycle that most stands out to me as a possible warning sign for you is Lori Zaff, who ran for city council. Coming into that year, there had been no incumbent city council members in the city of San Diego who lost a race of any kind, any party, from any district since 1991. And Lori Zaff, who was not subject of a scandal, she had not had any major problems in her district. She actually seemed to do pretty well in constituent services and that sort of thing. But she was nonetheless connected to President Trump in a number of mail pieces and what have you. And then she lost that race by over 10 points, was not even close. Given that you have had a number of very public experiences with the president, is that type of thing that you see this being a potential anchor on your reelection prospects in 2020, where Trump will be on the ballot? Sounds like that'll be central to a lot of voters' minds. Is that something that's going to hurt you in San Diego?
I'm hopeful that my track record will stand on its own, and the ability to communicate the type of work that I'm doing back out in the community will speak volumes. Now, knowing the popularity or the lack of popularity of our president, don't think for a minute heading there that I thought this was helpful in any way, shape, or form to my reelection. But I think it is a bold statement about my desire to do my job well, even if it means I put myself in a situation that isn't helpful to my reelection. Can you think of all the elected officials out there that don't come and sit in the chair and do a good job because they're worried about their reelection? That's all they're ever worried about. And it happens more frequently in seats that are turning over every 2 years because someone's always running for office. So when I sat there, I'll tell you, the last time in D.C. with the president, I told him I was told not to go. I said, I'm here because while I'm elected to this office, I need to do my job. I need to do my job well. San Diego deserves representation at the table on some challenging public safety issues. I'm going to put myself there every day of the week because the other elected officials are unwilling to do so. So I hope the voters can see the level of conviction in which I operate, the ability to make tough decisions that feel wrong at the time, possibly even in the room, but making the right decisions for San Diego. And one thing that's helped me is that I've never needed this job. Never needed this job from the onset. My life was full, my plate was full, but I sat back and watched people make decisions for me. I watched week after week 5 people fill those city council chairs that I didn't believe represented me and my community. So at the thick of life, I was willing to set some things aside and serve in this capacity, knowing that I didn't need the title. I have the best title in the world. My title is mom. I love that title. So mayor doesn't top that. Supervisor doesn't top that. If I were president of the United States, it wouldn't top that. But the ability to serve and not have to worry constantly about what it means for my reelection. And I saw those qualities in Lori too, that Lori was willing to really roll up her sleeves and work out in her community, and her intentions in office were very pure. And so the voters, spoke on that particular race, but I think if the voters were more in touch with the service that she was doing out in the community, maybe they would have decided a different way.
Supervisor Gaspar, running for re-election in 2020. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.